My name is Samantha Lee. I'm 29 years old and I work as a freelance graphic designer. I've always been passionate about creating art and building a career that allows me to express myself. 6 months ago, I married Andrew Lee, a 33-year-old business consultant who's incredibly talented at what he does. Andrew is the kind of person who can walk into a room and immediately win people over with his charm and confidence. I fell in love with him because of his kindness and the way he always made me feel like I was his priority. We live in a cozy 2-bedroom apartment in the city. It's not huge, but it's perfect for us. I've spent months decorating it to make it feel like home. Soft lighting, warm colors, and little touches of my personality everywhere. Andrew and I had big plans for our future. We were saving up for a house, dreaming of a place where we could start a family someday. Life felt like it was finally falling into place. But then, everything changed. It started with a phone call from Andrew's mother, Veronica. She's 55 and she used to be a stay-at-home mom. Andrew always spoke highly of her, saying she was the glue that held their family together. I'd only met her a few times before the wedding, and while she seemed polite, there was always this underlying tension in her tone when she spoke to me. I brushed it off, thinking it was just nerves or maybe her way of adjusting to her son getting married. The phone call came out of nowhere. Veronica said she was having some temporary issues with her living situation. Apparently, her landlord had decided to sell the house she was renting, and she needed a place to stay while she figured things out. Andrew, being the caring son he is, immediately offered to let her stay with us. He didn't even ask me first. When he told me, I hesitated. It wasn't that I didn't want to help her. I understood that family is important, but the idea of having someone else in our small apartment made me uneasy. I'd worked so hard to create a peaceful space for us, and I wasn't sure how her presence would change that. But Andrew reassured me, saying it would only be for a few weeks. She just needs a little time to get back on her feet, he said. It'll be fine. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to be supportive, so I agreed. The day Veronica arrived, I tried my best to make her feel welcome. I cleaned the apartment from top to bottom, prepared the guest room, and even cooked a nice dinner. She walked in with a suitcase and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Thank you for letting me stay," she said, her voice dripping with politeness. But there was something in the way she looked around the apartment, like she was already judging it. That night, as we sat down for dinner, she started making little comments. "Oh, you don't have a proper dining table. I guess that's fine for now." Or, "This apartment is so cozy. I'm sure it's perfect for just the two of you." I smiled and nodded, trying not to let her words get to me. Andrew didn't seem to notice. He was just happy to have his mom there. I told myself it was just an adjustment period. She was probably feeling out of place and needed time to settle in. But deep down, I had a sinking feeling that this wasn't going to be as temporary as Andrew had promised. At first, I tried to convince myself that everything was fine. Veronica was polite enough, and Andrew seemed happy to have her around. But it didn't take long for the cracks to start showing. The first issue came up just a few days after she moved in. I was in the kitchen making coffee for Andrew and me before we started our day. We're not big breakfast people, usually just a cup of coffee and maybe a piece of toast if we're feeling fancy. Veronica walked in, still in her robe, and looked at the counter with a frown. "No breakfast?" she asked, her tone sharp. "Andrew works so hard, and you're sending him off with just coffee? A proper wife would make sure her husband has a full meal to start his day." I froze, the coffee pot still in my hand. "Oh, Andrew usually doesn't eat breakfast," I said, trying to keep my voice light. "He prefers something light in the morning." She shook her head, clearly unimpressed. "That's not healthy. When I was raising Andrew and his brother, I always made sure they had a full breakfast. Eggs, bacon, toast, fruit, the works. A man can't function on an empty stomach." Andrew walked in at that moment, yawning and rubbing his eyes. "Morning," he said, grabbing his coffee and giving me a quick kiss on the cheek. Veronica turned to him, her expression softening immediately. "Andrew, you should let Samantha know that coffee isn't enough for breakfast," she said sweetly. "You need something more substantial." Andrew just shrugged. "I'm fine, Mom. Coffee's all I need." But Veronica wasn't satisfied. She gave me a pointed look, as if to say, "See, he doesn't know what's best for him, but I do." I bit my tongue and let it go, but the comment stayed with me all day. The next issue came when I was working on a project for a client. As a freelance graphic designer, I work from home most of the time. I'd set up a small workspace in the corner of the living room with my laptop, sketch pad, and a few other tools I needed. It wasn't much, but it worked for me. One afternoon, I was deep in concentration, trying to meet a tight deadline, when Veronica walked in. She stood behind me for a moment, watching as I worked. Then she said, "You know, it's not very professional to work in the living room. Don't you have an office or something?" I turned to her, surprised. "This is my workspace," I said. "It's small, but it works for me." She frowned. "It just seems messy. If I were you, I'd find a way to make it more presentable. What if a client came over and saw this? It doesn't look very professional." I clenched my jaw, trying to stay calm. "My clients don't come here," I said. "Everything is done online." She didn't seem to hear me. Instead, she started rearranging things on my desk, moving my sketch pad and pens to different spots. "There, that's better," she said, stepping back to admire her work. I wanted to scream. This was my space, my work, and she was treating it like it was hers to control. But I didn't say anything. I just waited until she left the room and put everything back the way it was. The little comments and actions started piling up. She'd criticized the way I folded the laundry, the way I cleaned the bathroom, even the way I decorated the apartment. "This color scheme is so dull," she said one day, running her fingers along the edge of the couch. "You should add some brighter colors. It would make the place feel more alive." Andrew, of course, didn't notice any of this, or if he did, he didn't say anything. Whenever I tried to bring it up, he'd brush it off. "She's just trying to help," he'd say. "Don't take it personally." But it was hard not to take it personally. Every comment felt like a jab, a reminder that I wasn't good enough in her eyes. And the worst part was, I couldn't escape it. She was always there, always watching, always judging. One evening, after a particularly long day, I decided to treat myself to a bubble bath. I filled the tub, lit a few candles, and sank into the warm water, hoping to relax. But just as I was starting to unwind, there was a knock on the bathroom door. "Samantha?" Veronica's voice called out. "Are you in there?" "Yes," I said, trying to keep the irritation out of my voice. "I'm taking a bath." "Well, don't take too long," she said. "I need to use the bathroom." I sighed, my moment of peace shattered. "Okay, I'll be out in a few minutes." When I came out, wrapped in the towel, she was standing in the hallway with her arms crossed. "You know, it's not very considerate to take such long baths when other people need to use the bathroom," she said. I stared at her, speechless. It had been maybe 20 minutes, and she had her own bathroom in the guest room. But I didn't argue. I just nodded and went to my room, feeling more defeated than ever. By this point, I was starting to feel like a guest in my own home. Veronica's presence was suffocating, and Andrew's inability to stand up for me only made it worse. I didn't know how much longer I could take it. The tension in the apartment was growing thicker by the day. Veronica's comments and actions were no longer subtle. They were outright criticisms, and I was starting to feel like I couldn't do anything right in her eyes. But what made it worse was Andrew's complete lack of awareness. He either didn't notice the way his mother treated me or chose to ignore it. Either way, I was left to deal with it on my own. One Saturday morning, I decided to sleep in. It had been a long week, and I just wanted a few extra hours of rest. But at 7:30 a.m., I was jolted awake by the sound of pots and pans clanging in the kitchen. I groaned, pulling the blanket over my head, but the noise only got louder. Finally, I got up and went to see what was going on. Veronica was in the kitchen, pulling out ingredients and setting them on the counter. "Good morning," she said cheerfully when she saw me. "I thought I'd make breakfast for everyone." I forced a smile. "That's nice of you," I said, though I was still half asleep. She glanced at me, her eyes narrowing slightly. "You know, Samantha, it wouldn't hurt for you to get up earlier and do this yourself. A wife should take care of her husband, especially on the weekends." I felt my stomach drop. "I usually do," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "but I thought I'd sleep in today, since it's my day off." She shook her head, clicking her tongue. "Sleeping in is a bad habit. It's lazy. When I was your age, I was up at dawn every day making sure my family was taken care of." I didn't respond. I just stood there, feeling a mix of anger and humiliation. Andrew walked in a few minutes later, yawning and stretching. "What's going on?" he asked, oblivious to the tension in the room. "Your mother is making breakfast," I said, my voice tight. "That's great," he said with a smile, completely missing the look on my face. "Thanks, Mom." I wanted to scream. How could he not see what was happening? How could he not realize how much her words were hurting me? The breaking point came a few days later. I was working on a big project for a client, one that could potentially lead to more opportunities in the future. I'd been at my desk for hours, completely focused, when Veronica walked in. "Still working?" she asked, her tone dripping with disapproval. "Yes," I said without looking up. "I have a deadline tomorrow." She sighed loudly, as if I were inconveniencing her. "You know, Samantha, it wouldn't kill you to take a break and do something productive around the house. This place could use a good cleaning." I froze, my hands hovering over the keyboard. "I'll clean later," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "Right now, I need to finish this." She crossed her arms, leaning against the doorframe. "You spend so much time on that computer. I don't understand how Andrew puts up with it. A wife's priority should be her home and her husband, not some silly job." That was it. I couldn't take it anymore. I turned to her, my voice shaking with anger. "This silly job is what pays the bills. It's what allows Andrew and me to live in this apartment. And for the record, I do plenty around the house. Just because I don't do things your way doesn't mean I'm not contributing." Her eyes widened in shock, as if she couldn't believe I'd dared to talk back to her. "There's no need to get defensive," she said, her voice cold. "I'm just trying to help." "Help?" I said, my voice rising. "You're not helping. You're criticizing me constantly. Nothing I do is ever good enough for you." At that moment, Andrew walked in, looking confused. "What's going on?" he asked, glancing between the two of us. "Your wife is being disrespectful," Veronica said, her voice trembling with fake hurt. "I was just trying to give her some advice and she snapped at me." I stared at her, my mouth open in disbelief. "That's not what happened," I said, turning to Andrew. "She's been criticizing me nonstop since she moved in. I can't take it anymore." Andrew looked uncomfortable, like he didn't know whose side to take. "Mom's just trying to help," he said finally. "You don't have to take it so personally." I felt like the air had been knocked out of me. "Are you serious?" I said, my voice breaking. "You're taking her side?" "I'm not taking sides," he said quickly. "I just think you're overreacting." Overreacting. That word hit me like a slap in the face. I turned and walked out of the room, tears stinging my eyes. I couldn't believe this was my life. I couldn't believe the man I married was standing by while his mother tore me down. That night, I called Megan, Andrew's sister-in-law. We'd only met a few times, but she'd always been kind to me. I needed someone to talk to, someone who might understand what I was going through. When I told her what was happening, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then she said, Samantha, I know exactly what you're dealing with. Veronica did the same thing to me when I first married Steve. I felt a wave of relief. Really? I said. How did you handle it? I didn't, she said with a bitter laugh. Steve and I ended up moving out of state just to get away from her. She's always been like this, controlling, demanding, and impossible to please. And the worst part is, she's terrible with money. That's why she's living with you. She's burned through her savings and can't afford to live on her own. I was stunned. Andrew never told me that. Of course he didn't, Megan said. He probably doesn't want to admit it, but trust me, Samantha, you're not the problem. She is. Her words were both comforting and devastating. On one hand, it was a relief to know I wasn't alone. On the other hand, it confirmed what I'd been dreading. Veronica wasn't going anywhere, and Andrew wasn't going to stand up to her. After my conversation with Megan, everything started to make sense. Veronica's constant criticism, her need to control every aspect of our lives, and her refusal to respect boundaries. It wasn't just about me. This was who she was. And Andrew? He had spent his entire life enabling her behavior. I realized that if I didn't stand up for myself, nothing would ever change. But knowing that didn't make it any easier to live with her. In fact, things only got worse. A few days later, I came home from running errands to find Veronica in the living room, rearranging the furniture. My heart sank. I had spent weeks carefully choosing and arranging everything to make the space feel like home, and now it looked completely different. "What are you doing?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. "Oh, I thought I'd help," she said, smiling as if she were doing me a favor. "The way you had it before just didn't make sense. This layout is much more practical." I stared at her, my hands clenched into fists. "Veronica, this is my home. You can't just change things without asking me." She looked genuinely surprised, as if the idea of asking for permission had never occurred to her. "I was only trying to help," she said, her tone defensive. "You should be grateful." "Grateful?" I said, my voice rising. "You've been here for weeks and all you've done is criticize me and take over my space. I've tried to be patient, but I can't do this anymore." At that moment, Andrew walked in carrying a bag of groceries. He looked between the two of us, clearly sensing the tension. "What's going on?" he asked. "Your wife is overreacting," Veronica said, crossing her arms. "I was just trying to make the apartment more functional, and she's acting like I committed a crime." I turned to Andrew, my voice shaking. "She's not respecting our home, Andrew. She's not respecting me. And you're just letting it happen." Andrew sighed, setting the groceries down on the counter. "Samantha, she's just trying to help. Can't you let it go?" "Let it go?" I said, my voice breaking. "Andrew, she's taken over everything. She criticizes the way I cook, the way I clean, the way I work. She's rearranged our furniture without asking. I feel like a guest in my own home." Andrew ran a hand through his hair, looking frustrated. "I don't know what you want me to do," he said. "She's my mom. I can't just kick her out." "Why not?" I said, tears streaming down my face. "She's an adult. She's perfectly capable of taking care of herself. But instead she's making my life miserable, and you're letting her." Veronica gasped, clutching her chest as if I'd just insulted her entire existence. "I can't believe you're talking about me like this," she said, her voice trembling. "After everything I've done for this family?" I turned to her, my voice cold. "What you've done is make me feel like I'm not good enough, like I'll never be good enough, and I'm done." That night I slept in the guest room. I couldn't bear to be near Andrew, not after he had once again chosen his mother over me. I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, wondering how my life had come to this. I had married Andrew because I thought we were a team, but now I felt like I was fighting this battle alone. The next morning, I made a decision. I couldn't keep living like this. I couldn't keep sacrificing my happiness and my sense of self just to keep the peace. Something had to change. Later that day, I sat down with Andrew. "We need to talk," I said, my voice firm. He looked up from his laptop, his expression wary. "Okay. I can't do this anymore," I said. "I can't live with your mother. She's toxic, Andrew. She's controlling, manipulative, and she doesn't respect me. If she stays, I'm leaving." Andrew's eyes widened. "You're giving me an ultimatum?" "No," I said, shaking my head. "I'm setting a boundary. I've tried to make this work, but it's not working. I need to put myself first because clearly no one else is going to." He stared at me for a long moment, his face a mix of shock and anger. "You're being unreasonable," he said finally. "She's my mom. She has nowhere else to go." "She has options," I said. "She could stay with Steve and Megan. She could find her own place, but she's not my responsibility, Andrew. She's yours, and if you're not willing to stand up to her, then I can't stay in this marriage." Andrew didn't say anything. He just sat there, staring at the floor. I waited for him to say something, to fight for me, to show me that I mattered. But he didn't. That night I packed a bag and left. I didn't know where I was going or what I was going to do, but I knew I couldn't stay. I couldn't keep sacrificing my happiness for a man who wasn't willing to fight for me. As I walked out the door, Veronica stood in the hallway, watching me with a smug look on her face. "I knew you weren't cut out for this family," she said. I didn't respond. I just walked away, tears streaming down my face, but also feeling a strange sense of relief. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. When I left that night, I didn't have a clear plan. I just knew I needed space. Space to think, to breathe, and to figure out what I wanted for my life. I stayed with a close friend, Emily, who welcomed me with open arms and didn't ask too many questions. She could see the exhaustion in my face, the weight I'd been carrying for weeks. The first few days were the hardest. I kept replaying everything in my head. Veronica's constant criticisms, Andrew's refusal to stand up for me, and the moment I walked out the door. Part of me felt guilty, like I had failed as a wife. But another part of me, a quieter but stronger part, felt proud. For the first time in a long time, I had chosen myself. A week later, Andrew called. I stared at my phone for a long time before answering, unsure of what to expect. "Samantha," he said, his voice soft. "Can we talk?" I hesitated. "What is there to talk about, Andrew? I told you what I needed, and you made your choice." "I didn't make a choice," he said quickly. I didn't know what to do. You put me in an impossible position." "No, Andrew," I said, my voice firm. "Your mother put you in an impossible position, and instead of standing up for me, for us, you let her control everything. I can't live like that." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "I miss you," he said finally. "I miss us." I closed my eyes, tears welling up. "I miss us too," I admitted. "But I can't come back unless something changes. I need to know that you're willing to set boundaries with your mother. I need to know that I'm your priority." "I don't know if I can do that," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. And that was it. That was the moment I knew it was over. I couldn't spend my life waiting for him to grow a backbone. I couldn't keep sacrificing my happiness for someone who wasn't willing to fight for me. "I'm sorry, Andrew," I said, my voice breaking, "but I can't come back. I need to move on." Over the next few weeks, I started to rebuild my life. I threw myself into my work, taking on new clients and projects that challenged me creatively. For the first time in months, I felt like myself again. I wasn't just Andrew's wife or Veronica's target. I was Samantha Lee, a talented graphic designer with dreams and ambitions of my own. One day, I got an email from a design agency in Tokyo. They had seen my portfolio online and were impressed with my work. They wanted to offer me a position on their team with the opportunity to move to Japan. It was a dream come true, but it also felt terrifying. Could I really leave everything behind and start over in a new country? I thought about it for days, weighing the pros and cons, but in the end, the answer was clear. This was my chance to take control of my life, to create a future that was entirely my own. I accepted the offer and started making plans to move. Before I left, I met with Megan for coffee. She had been a source of support throughout everything, and I wanted to thank her. I heard about the job in Tokyo, she said, smiling. That's amazing, Samantha. I'm so proud of you. Thank you, I said, feeling a warmth in my chest. I'm nervous, but I think it's the right move. It is, she said firmly. You deserve to be happy. And honestly, I think leaving Andrew was the best thing you could have done. He's a good guy, but he's too tied to his mom. He's never going to change. I nodded, knowing she was right. I just wish things had been different, I said. I loved him, you know. I know, she said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. But sometimes love isn't enough. You need respect, support, and a partner who's willing to stand by you. And if Andrew couldn't give you that, then you made the right choice. Her words stayed with me as I prepared for my move. I realized that leaving Andrew wasn't just about escaping Veronica. It was about choosing myself. For so long, I had put everyone else's needs ahead of my own. But now, I was finally putting myself first. The day I left for Tokyo, I felt a mix of emotions. Nervousness, excitement, and a tinge of sadness. As the plane took off, I looked out the window and thought about everything I was leaving behind. But I also thought about everything I was gaining. A fresh start, a new adventure, and the chance to build a life that was truly mine. Andrew called me one last time before I left. I'm sorry, he said. I wish I had done things differently. I wish you had too, I said softly, but it's too late now. I need to move on. And with that, I closed the chapter on that part of my life. In Tokyo, I found a sense of freedom I hadn't felt in years. I threw myself into my work, exploring the city and meeting new people. For the first time in a long time, I felt truly happy. I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. Looking back, I don't regret marrying Andrew. He taught me a lot about love, about compromise, and about what I'm willing to accept in a relationship. But more importantly, he taught me the value of standing up for myself and knowing my worth. Sometimes, walking away is the hardest thing you can do, but it's also the bravest. And in the end, it's the only way to find the happiness you truly deserve. As I settled into my new life in Tokyo, I began to reflect on everything I had been through. The pain, the heartbreak, the moments of doubt. They had all shaped me into the person I was becoming. For the first time in years, I felt free. Free from the constant judgment, free from the suffocating expectations, and free to live life on my own terms. I found joy in the little things. Walking through the bustling streets of Shibuya, trying new foods, and immersing myself in a culture so different from what I had known. My work flourished, and I started to gain recognition for my designs. But more importantly, I found myself again. The Samantha who had dreams, who had confidence, and who knew her worth. One evening, as I sat in my small but cozy apartment overlooking the city, I received an email from Andrew. It was short, just a few lines, but it carried the weight of everything he hadn't been able to say before. Samantha, I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. I realize now how much I let you down, and I regret not standing up for you when you needed me. You deserved better, and I hope you found the happiness you were looking for. I stared at the screen for a long time, my emotions swirling. Part of me wanted to respond, to tell him that I forgave him, that I still cared about him in some way, but another part of me knew that this chapter of my life was closed. I didn't need his apology to move on. I had already done that. So I closed the email and let it be. Looking back, I realized that leaving Andrew wasn't just about escaping a toxic situation. It was about reclaiming my life. For so long, I had put everyone else's needs ahead of my own. Andrew's, Veronica's, even the expectations of what a perfect wife should be. But in the end, I learned that my happiness mattered too, that I deserved to be in a relationship where I was respected, supported, and loved for who I was. It wasn't an easy lesson to learn, and it came with a lot of pain, but it was worth it, because now I'm living a life that feels authentic to me, a life where I wake up every day excited for what's to come, instead of dreading what I might face. To anyone out there who feels trapped in a situation like I did, I want you to know this: you are not alone. It's okay to set boundaries. It's okay to say no. And it's okay to walk away from people who don't value you. It doesn't make you selfish. It makes you strong. Sometimes the hardest thing you can do is choose yourself. But it's also the most important, because at the end of the day, you are the one who has to live with your choices, and you deserve to live a life that makes you happy. As I sit here now writing this, I feel a sense of peace I never thought I'd find. My journey wasn't easy, but it led me to where I am today, and for that, I'm grateful. This is my story, and if it inspires even one person to stand up for themselves, to choose their own happiness, then it was worth sharing. Thank you for listening.